Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this narration of the web series The Lost Terran. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 21. Who would have been out to sabotage you and your convoy? Munto asked. There are always groups hidden to approve of colonization and humanization of planets. Terra only knows how many, but almost none of them were actually violent over it. Rix leaned back, lost in recall. What benefit would there be in sabotaging your efforts? Munto tried to see the motive. Most likely political. I never paid all of that too much in the way of attention. But it'd make sense. Sabotage the tech structure of a far-flung colony so that it disappears and becomes an embarrassment. Channel the resources somewhere else. Just because we were basically a stratocracy doesn't mean that we're immune to the human ego or corruption. Rix gestured vaguely. Munto considered this. Given their lack of much prior experience with organics, preferring to stick to the exploration part of their charter, Munto considered the resource constraints equation. It made sense that competing entities consuming a set amount of given resources would willfully compete for greater amounts of said resources and complete particular acts to place the opponent at a disadvantage in consuming said resources. And in a society with constrained resources, it would perhaps be logical to do so. However, by the same token, entities should consider the investment of a given resource from the perspective of overarching benefit. In the case of colony building, it made sense that it would consume a significant amount of resources from the outset, but in return on investment, assuming a prudently selected site, would be several-fold greater. In short, Munto could see no benefit in a Terran sabotaging a Terran colony attempt. What resources would be so constrained that a member of your species would resort to sabotage? Munto continued thinking. Well, assuming it was someone in the TSE, probably someone either opposed to us having a new colony, or someone paid to have that opinion. If that was someone else, who knows? I know the TSE was more or less looked down on by every other nations, but I never really paid it much mind, Rick shrugged. Would returning to your departure point provide another opportunity for a clue? Munto suggested. Most likely. I hope to find something here, but I guess that was a pipe dream. Rix looked over at the walking frame for the first time in several minutes. Seeking your species is not an invalid effort, Munto replied, leaving out the statistics of finding Terrans. I appreciate the thought, M. If we are able to determine the ultimate fate of Terrans and perhaps obtain evidence that of the effect, including potential other Terrans, we would be able to assert adequately your status as a Terran and my status as non-malfunctioning, Munto explained. Speaking of which, what's the chance your fellow Tassets know we're here? Rix asked. Munto took a moment to think about the likelihoods as well as their own variant estimates. Approximately 37% likelihood that they are searching in an area of our departure for us. Approximately a 10% likelihood that they have an estimate on a direction in which we are oriented for travel, and approximately a 1.3% chance that they have a fix on this region of space to seek us out. Munto double-checked the numbers. I thought space was big enough that they'd have trouble accomplishing that last figure. Rick's face appeared to scrunch. In theory, yes. However, as I've been accessing GullNet through the station and am able to make queries substantially faster than average organic, if they have a means of tracking the queries, then it would be quite easy to localize this area of space, Munto said. I don't suppose there's a way to slow your queries down, Rick suggested, and Munto flashed an instant negative ruin. Well, not impossible. It would require significant extra effort on my part, Munto replied. A bit like focusing on a particular sensation or the equivalent of ignoring said sensation. It would not be impossible, but would require the focus to do so as to prevent taking that particular action reflexively. Like holding onto a piece of ice and trying not to think about how being cold, Rix wondered aloud. I believe that would be an appropriate approximation. Munto flashed the rune for understanding obtained. So we have to get some food or some way of keeping me fed. Run a mass scoop to keep the fusion going, and then we can plot a course to go home. All before your fellow Tassets find us, Rix enumerated. That is a reasonable summary. Given the time dilation impact as well as the distance covered, it is likely that we have several weeks before they arrive, unless there are Tassets which have been alerted to our presence already and are on their way. Munto ran through the search pattern that they would execute in a similar scenario internally. So we might have a few weeks lead time, but on the other hand, we might not, Rick summarized. Correct. Will they do anything to blind if we do get discovered and run? Rix's face showed a strange degree of concern.
It would be exceptionally irregular. They are most likely to inquire for data from the station's logs and sensors and ignore Bryan unless some additional directive were in play,
Munter said. Like a quarantine concern?
Perhaps. But given that the station will have logs regarding the use of the medical field, it is unlikely that would be of any particular note.
Munter replayed the walking frame's memories of meeting in the docking bay. Even a little excursion in walking her back to her quarters. Munter's thought pattern froze and retracted that segment of memory. The Terran had not put on his helmet for that. It hadn't even registered to Munter. Quickly, they began running the likelihood of the bacteria/viral infection, incubation times, latent impacts, and even immune responses by Quinn. Rix was not unclean, but given how much the Terran sweated and breathed through his mouth when conducting particularly strong feats, it wasn't impossible that the station was in fact contaminated. Even though Rix had come right back, that might have been enough.
That is a concern.
Munter flashed the symbol for chilling realization. What would they do then? Rix asked. It took Munter a bit internally digging, but eventually found the medical contamination protocols within themselves. It was one of the few areas where Tassets technically had authority to act against organics. Exactly how was not clearly defined, but the authorization appeared to be enough.
If they determine that there is a risk to a breach of quarantine, the organics are to submit indefinitely until such time as the quarantine is ended, Munter said, flashing chilling realization again. So Bryan could be stuck here for a very long time. From what you've said about her from the station records, I don't think she would object to that too much, Rick shrugged. Tacit quarantine limits including nothing in and nothing out. Bryan has no backup food supplies on board, Munter said, spelling it out.
So, indefinitely means that she starves to death. Rix's face was one of horror.
Exactly. Unless they think that she is a risk to breach quarantine, in which case they have the freedom to action to maintain the quarantine, Munter said, leaving the statement hanging in the air.
Meaning that if she tries to leave or someone else tries to get her to get food, the Tassets can intervene. Can Tassets commit violence? Rix asked, his face looking more and more grim with each passing word.
Under normal circumstances, no. Medical containment in a galactic setting, however, is one of the few times where it is technically possible,
Munter said flatly. Rix appeared to think for a long moment. Hold on. How does any being interact without it being a risk? Rix pressed.
Standard inoculations are maintained for all spacefaring species. You've had none of, and being from 900 years ago, I cannot definitely say as to whether the inoculations would do anything good against anything that you might be carrying, or anything you might encounter.
Munter displayed a rune for worst-case scenario. If I'm understanding you correctly, I could already have gotten something from Bryan or the station, or I may have been breathing wrong on the station, and now some ancient bug that's nothing to me is now a risk to make Bryan sick, Rix attempted.
That is correct.
How do we fix it? Rix immediately responded.
Elimination of atmosphere and all organic materials would provide enough quarantine over a period of no less than 30 days, plus exposure to strong radiation would be nominally sufficient.
Munter read from the directive. Well, that's not happening. All organic materials, including me and Reggie and Bryan. Rix shook his head itself in disbelief. So, we've got to ensure that Bryan either has a way to feed herself for a long time, or she needs to come with us.
That is not an unreasonable summary of the related outcomes.
Well, I wanted to know how to make a trade. I guess this is it. So, how do we make it happen? Rix stood up and stretched.
Which option do you believe to be optimal?
If it were me, I'd say let's go for an adventure, but given how she reacted to me, I'd bet she'd rather stay here, far away from me, Rix said, bending in half and grasping the backs of his knees.
In that case, I recommend I command the auto-fabricator to produce sufficient mass scoops and a portable printer loaded with standard Quinn food templates in order to support Bryan for no less than 100 weeks,
Munter said simply. But that's using her own stuff. How is that helping? Rix prompted.
Quinn often have issues maneuvering in space due to their instincts to fly in open spaces. The installation of mass scoops would be significantly eased if you were to place them and provide for the appropriate hookups, Munter explained.
Fair enough. Now we just need to tell Bryan all of this. Rix looked at the walking frame meaningfully.
I will handle that. You go get suited up,
Munter said and reached out to the communication system.
Bryan, are you available?
Munter's mechanical voice and text came from the panel in Bryan's command center. In what sense? Bryan asked the prompt and command communications panel.
Do you have adequate time to discuss a matter of some importance? Certainly. What is it? Something wrong? In a manner, yes. Due to the period of time during which you were unconscious and Rick returned you to your quarters, you may have exposed one another to microorganisms and/or disease uncommon to the other. He's gonna get sick, possibly. Alternatively, you may become ill. I had all my shots, though. Due to the time period involved, that may not be sufficient. So what happens? I get loader-only deliveries and run quarantine for an extra 2 months. You two do whatever it is that you need to on sticking with the same. There is a complicating factor. I figured there might be. What is it? If a medical quarantine is declared and enforced by Tassets, they operate a strict nothing-in, nothing-out policy with anti-organic enforcement if required. Wait, does that mean that you'll lock us in? I am unable to do so in my current capacity, and Rix maintains sufficient controls that he would be able to circumvent any actions I took to this effect. So you are fugitives? Officially, I am a malfunctioning Tacet core that has been hijacked by a member of a species whose extinct status is disputed. Same difference. You're being tracked down, and if they find you, things will happen. A reasonable summary. So how long is a Tacet quarantine? Indefinite, depending on the anticipated countermeasures required. Countermeasures in this case being formulations based on standard inoculations, level 3 medical sterilization fields, elimination of all organic materials. That doesn't sound so bad. You would fall under the category of organic material. Oh, indeed. And your food supplies, while sufficient to permit you to survive without resupply for several months, may not be enough. So what's the good news? Mix and I are going to outfit your station with a portable printer/auto fabricator equipped with Quinn food templates and mass scoops. This will provide you with sufficient supplies to maintain your food supplies. I'm not really into autofab food. It is intended as a gesture in good faith given the situation. So, how long do you two have until you get tracked down? Uncertain. Well, you're just full of good news, I guess. What do you need from me? Will you accept our outfitting of your station? I can't really say no. You can, but it would be inadvisable. I'm surprised your station is not already equipped with an equivalent. There's a bunch of the station that doesn't see much use, so they've pulled a bunch of the old auxiliary systems over the years. The pair sat in silence for a long moment before Bryan's communication board chimed with a message, since messages were comparatively rare, tending to be various system-wide notifications. Bryan didn't normally do more than glance at them. Tapping it up, she blinked long and hard at it, virtually. So too did Munto. System Terran message. Do not attempt to return to origin. Coordinates 0101A-777-003M. Additional coordinates to follow. What does it mean? Bryan asked aloud, not intending to. It means we have less time than we thought. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Casper Arnholtz, Maxwell, Lord Azrekahl, Dragzoon W.R.E, Holly's sister, AmbroseKTal, and Quantem Wensday. Thank you very much.